Hey, it's Andrew from me.io. Welcome back. This is part 3 of my free ESLint mini course. If you haven't watched parts 1 or 2, do go ahead and watch those first. Otherwise, this video is going to make no sense at all. So the goal for this video is to come up with a more robust real-world set of rules. And what we're going to do is actually install a third-party ESLint configuration. So right now we are extending ESLint recommended. This comes built in. What we're going to do is use a set of ESLint rules configured and provided to us by Airbnb. Airbnb has a ton of great open source projects like React Dates, Enzyme, and others. One of them is their ESLint configuration. It's super popular. So we're going to use that as our new base, and we'll learn how we can customize the rules from there. So the first thing we need to do is figure out where all of this lives. And we're going to look at the Airbnb JavaScript style guide to get started. You can Google Airbnb JavaScript style guide, and that should bring you over to the JavaScript repository under the Airbnb GitHub organization. I'm going to head over there, and on this particular README, we have access to all of the various principles that they use when writing JavaScript. So there are various rules related to all sorts of things, and if you scroll down, you can see that all of them come with a good and a bad way to get the job done. Now, not all of these can be enforced with ESLint, but plenty of them can. So what we're going to do is use the Airbnb ESLint configuration. This lives under the packages directory, and there are actually two here. There is the base version. This includes just JavaScript, and then there is the non-base version, which also adds support for React, since Airbnb makes heavy use of React in their ecosystem. What we're going to do is install this version as well. This is going to give us access to a larger range of support. We'll be able to type things like JSX right in our files, and ESLint will actually understand what's going on. Let's go ahead and move over here, and we're going to kick things off by running a really long installation command. This package needs to get installed, and it has some peer dependencies of its own that we're also going to want to set up locally. So let's go ahead and just take a few seconds to knock this one out from the terminal. I'm going to switch over to the terminal and run this command. First up, I am going to use npm init or yarn init to actually create a package.json file. I'm going to stick with the default option for everything, just hitting enter to get through to the end. Now that we have a package.json file in place, we can go ahead and actually run the installation command, and all the dependencies will be saved inside of there. We already have ESLint installed, and it's already listed as a dependency, but we actually want that as a dev dependency instead. So I'm going to manually switch that inside of Visual Studio Code real quickly. In package.json, I'm just going to take ESLint, cut it out from dependencies, and move it down below. Now we can go ahead and install all of the other things we need to use the Airbnb configuration. I'm going to clear the output to bring things up to the top, and we're going to use npm install with the save dev flag. If you're using yarn, that would be yarn add with the dev flag. Then we're going to provide all of the various packages. So first up is the actual package ESLint config Airbnb. We're going to be grabbing the latest version of all of these. That's 16.1.0. Next up, we have its dependencies. First up is ESLint plugin import at 2.7.0. We also have ESLint plugin React, and as the name suggests, these are all plugins for ESLint at 7.4.0. And the last one is ESLint plugin, and this one is JSX A11Y at, and that is 6.0.1. So all of these are required to use ESLint config Airbnb. They are peer dependencies. Let's go ahead and run the command. We are going to install all of those. And once they are set up, to actually switch to the Airbnb rules, all we need to do is swap out ESLint recommended right here with Airbnb. Now we can go ahead and save the ESLint configuration. We can switch over to app.js, and you're going to notice that right away, nothing is actually showing up. We have no new errors, which is great. What we do have, though, is a new set of rules. So one of them that wasn't in ESLint recommended and is in Airbnb is called no var. If we go ahead and swap out const for a var, in the past this was perfectly fine, but now you can see we are getting an issue when we're using the Airbnb rules. Right here, unexpected var, use letter const instead. The rule is no hyphen var. So we can go ahead and swap that out for let if we need to reassign, or const if we don't. Both of those are perfectly valid. And you'll actually notice that when we used let, we got another issue because we are creating a variable using let, but we never reassign it, so it could be a const instead. Now, all of this can be a little stressful when you're first diving in because ESLint is basically just yelling at you, complaining about your programming abilities, but it is a good thing because once you do go through that first initial phase of figuring out what the rules are, you're going to get into the habit and you're not going to create these issues anymore. You're going to create a better program. You're going to have rules enforced and you're going to create better habits for yourself. So I do recommend sticking with most of the rules, but obviously there are exceptions. So let's go ahead and play around with some of the weird rules that are enforced. And these are things that we can tweak. We'll learn how to enable, disable, and configure rules in the ESLint RC file. First up, don't stress about getting your configuration right away. You can go ahead and just start writing code. And as warnings and errors pop up, you can go ahead and take a look at them, figure out if they are something that you actually care about, or if it's something that you really don't want to have enforced. So one of the things I always disable is what's known as comma dangling. So I'm going to create a few spaces right here, and you can actually see ESLint is complaining. I have more than one empty line. You can use an empty line to create code that's more readable, but a whole bunch of them is completely unnecessary. But as we do add code in, that'll go away. So what I'm going to do to show you this one is just create an object, const object. I'll set it up. I'll give it some properties. We're going to have 2. I'll have name equal to Andrew, and I'll have age equal to 26. And when we do this, we can see we have an error related to not using object. That's okay. I can live with that for this demo. But the error that I do want to talk about is this one right here, missing trailing comma. And this is the comma hyphen dangle rule. What they want you to do is to add a comma onto the end of the last property in all of your objects. This makes it easier to actually do things like switch your lines around. I can swap out lines without worrying about having missing commas. So for example, if I didn't have that comma dangle and I tried to swap the lines, we now have an invalid object because that first line doesn't have a comma. So while I get where this rule is coming from, I can make the conscious choice to either disable it completely or change it from being an error to just a warning. So let's go ahead and bring the code back to its broken state and figure out how we can get this done. The first thing you want to do is get the rule name, comma hyphen dangle. The second thing we're going to do is find the rule definition. This is a built-in rule. It comes from ESLint. You can see it right there in square brackets. So we can head over to their website. Over here, user guide, rules. I'm going to use Command F to search for comma hyphen dangle. It's sitting right here. I can crack that one open, and it's going to bring me to a page that talks about it. And it's going to talk exactly about why this rule even exists. It's going to give you a little bit of information about where they're coming from. Like I just explained, they're talking about switching up the lines and all sorts of things like that. Now, it's important to not just disable rules because you don't want to change your code. Do try to understand where they're coming from and why a rule exists, and then you can make the choice as to whether or not you want to play by that rule. Now right here you can see they do have some various options that you can use to customize it, but what we're going to do is go ahead and focus on just the very basics. We're going to figure out how to switch this over from an error to just a suggestion. So to get that done, we're going to go over to the ESLint configuration file. In here, we are going to set up a new root property called rules, and in there we're going to set up one for our rule, which is comma hyphen dangle. This is going to get set equal to a value, and here we can use a few different ones. We can use error to set it up as an error. We can use warning to set it up as a warning. It's actually warn, and we can use off to turn it off completely. So if I use off and I switch back over, you're going to see there is no error on line 6. If I use warning or warn and switch it over, you can see we're now getting a warning with the green highlighting. This is letting us know that this is something we might want to address. It's at least worth taking a look at the situation. And obviously we also have error, which is what we had before. This is where we do get an error that this is broken code. So for all of the rules that are built in and the rules that come with things like the React plugin, you have the option to customize them to fit your needs. Many of the rules available to you also come with options, so other things you can configure besides turning it off, setting it to a warning or an error. And to provide these, what we do is we take the value here and we swap it out from being a string, which I'm going to cut out to the clipboard, to being an array. The first thing in the array is the same value we had before. In this case, we want it to be an error as opposed to something like a warning or off. And the next thing, this is where you provide those options. Now for the options, you're going to want to look at the individual rule. So for example, for comma dangle, we have a bunch of different options we can use. We can say that it's an error because you're never allowed to use trailing commas, or we can say it's an error because you always must use trailing commas. So we can really customize this to fit your needs. I hate trailing commas so much, maybe I use never to say that even if you like them, you cannot use them with this configuration. All we would do for that is we would switch over to the config file. I would create that object, or I could use the syntax shown here. I can pass in never up above as the second argument, or I can get more detailed about where I want to actually apply these things. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and just type in never. And this says you are never allowed to use trailing commas. It's always going to be an error. I'm going to save the config file, switch over to app.js. Right here, we don't have any errors. If I actually add in the comma, we see we now get one. So the rule usually requires you to use them. We were able to use the options of the rule to disallow them. And this is something that you're going to be able to figure out as you integrate ESLint into your code base. As soon as you set it up, you're probably going to see a whole bunch of errors and warnings, and that's where you're really going to figure out how you write JavaScript. You probably already have habits. You just might not have verbalized them in terms of rules. By setting up ESLint, you're really going to figure out how exactly you write JavaScript code. That's going to make you a better developer, and it's going to make you a more consistent developer. So what I want to do from here is just customize one more rule that's commonly customized, just to give you a little more experience. This is a rule that you're going to see when you create functions and name arguments that might not get used. So it's actually very similar to the rule we see when we have this code. We have the exact same rule. No unused vars. In this case, yes, I agree with what the rule is saying. I have this var variable, I'm not using it, just go ahead and delete it. There's no need to create it. But consider the following example. I'm going to create a const work, and I'm going to set it equal to a promise. So I'll just make a new promise. I'm going to go ahead and pass it the function it requires. I'm going to pass in resolve and reject, and I'm going to go ahead and resolve some data. Some data, quite literally. Now with this code, we do have some errors, and some of them are indeed expected. We're getting an error related to not using work. If we were to use work, like work.then, we could go ahead and fix that one. I could use work.then to do something with the data, and I could just console.log it, console.log data. Now right here you can see we do get a warning related to console.log statements. Therefore, debugging purposes, they really shouldn't make it into your production code, and you can choose how to set up that rule, no console. You could enable it, you could make it an error, a warning, or disable it completely. Now, the thing I am interested in looking at is this right here. Reject is defined, but never used. And it's coming from the exact same rule that's causing this error. The thing is, I agree with this. I do not agree with this. I do like to name all of those arguments for a specific API. So if I want to use them later, they're already set up. This is almost like the documentation for what I have the ability to do. So what I want to do is customize the rule. I still want an error in this case, but I do want to allow inside of arguments that aren't actually used. So let's go ahead and set that up. We are going to customize that rule, no unused vars. Let's start by backtracking in the ESLint documentation and finding it in the rules list. No unused vars. There it is. We're going to head over there and we're going to configure it to fit our particular needs. Once again, we get a lot of information about why the rule exists in the first place, pretty straightforward stuff. Down below, that's where we can figure out how to customize it under options. So there are a few different options. We have vars, which lets us change the behavior for variables like bar. And down below, we have args, which lets us change the behavior for function arguments. And this is exactly what we're going to set up. And using just the examples shown here, we can figure out how to set this stuff up. We can set args equal to a few options. We're going to go ahead and disable it for arguments. And for variables, we have a few options as well. We can make sure that all variables are used, including globals. We're just going to go ahead and make sure that all local variables in that file are actually used. So let's go ahead and configure the rule to work like this. And we can see down below exactly what they are doing and how it's working for them. So we're going to go ahead and set this up right now. Over inside of the editor, I do still want to make this an error when it does get applied. So I'm going to add a new rule after comma dangle. It is no unused vars, and right here, the first argument will still be error. And the second argument, that's going to be our options object. I can go ahead and set that up right here. And on here, we can define how we want to configure things. So for vars, whoops, this is JSON, so make sure to put your properties in double quotes. We're going to go ahead and set the value equal to local. That's the behavior we're currently seeing, which we do want to maintain. For args, we're going to go ahead and change the value. So we're going to go ahead and turn it off. Down below, that is none. We're not going to check. Now, if we go ahead and save the ESLint configuration and switch over to app.js, you can see we're no longer getting an error up here, which is great. And we are getting an error up above, which is also great. We've now customized this rule to fit our particular needs. So as you customize all of the other rules available to you, you're going to go through the same steps. It's going to show up in your code. You're going to figure out why it's showing up, and then you're going to make a decision about what exactly you want to enforce. Now that's it for the base rules. I do want to take a quick moment to show you how you can set up support for JSX, since I know I have a lot of React developers out there. So to wrap up this video and this mini course, I'm going to switch over to app.js, and we're going to write a little React code. Now, if you've never used React before, but you're still interested in setting up the ESLint configuration, maybe you're getting started, that's perfectly fine. You can just follow along in app.js. I'm not going to explain everything. So first up, I am going to use import to import React from React. This should look familiar if you've worked with React before. Then down below, I'm going to go ahead and actually do something. So I'm going to create a const JSX, and I'm going to set it equal to, I'm going to create a little paragraph tag with a text value of test. Then I could go ahead and use something like react.dom.render. I could import that if I wanted to wrap up our little program. Down below, react.dom.render. We are going to render JSX, and we're going to use document.getElementById to figure out where we want to render it, and we'll render it in a element with an ID of app. So yeah, we did go pretty fast there, but this is a React 101 application, and it should look familiar if you've worked with React before. So we got a few issues we want to resolve up above. We have issues related to imports. React should be listed as a project dependency. So this one is pretty cool. It's actually letting you know that you're trying to use a module that you don't have installed. That's going to save some errors when you're doing something like deploying. Down below, we have another issue, and this is the one I really do want to talk about. JSX not allowed in files with the extension .js. So we're going to go ahead and fix all of this stuff. For our example, if this was a real-world project, we would actually install React and React DOM. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to use npm install with the save flag, React, React DOM. Once I install both of those, we won't have those errors related to the import anymore, and they go away automatically. This is just fantastic. The next one, though, is a rule that we will need to customize. And as you can see, the rule is called React / then the rule name. That's because it's not part of the base ESLint rules. It actually comes from the plugin that we installed. So let's go ahead and figure out how to track down that rule, and more importantly, how to customize it. It comes from that React plugin, so we're going to find the documentation for that. I'm going to go over to the browser. I am going to Google the exact thing we installed. That was ESLint -plugin -react. This is where the rules are defined, and if we go over there, we can find the documentation. Now, a lot of it is stuff we've already done or things that happen internally because we used the Airbnb config. What we're interested in here is the rules list. Down below, list of supported rules. And pretty high up on that list should be the file extensions issue that we're seeing right now. So I'm going to go ahead and search for it. Extension, it's right there. It's about the, sixth one, JSX file name extension. And if we go ahead and click that, well, it's not the exact same format as the ESLint website. It's pretty similar. They talk about why the rule exists, and they talk about the options. In this case, we can specify an array of extensions we want to use. So here we are actually setting it up to work with JS files or JSX files. These days, we really just use .js. I haven't seen someone use .jsx in a while, but you could set that up if you wanted to. Now you notice for the first argument, they're not using the string off, warn, or error. They're actually using a number. You can use numbers instead of those strings where 0 is off, 1 is a warning, and 2 is an error. So here they've tweaked the rule to be a warning, and it is only a warning if you're not using .js or .jsx. So let's go ahead and fix that in our code as well. I'm going to switch over to Visual Studio Code, head over to the ESLint configuration. Right alongside of my other rules, I'm going to go ahead and provide this one, react/JSX, file name, extension. I'm going to set this up. If we wanted to, we could just turn it off completely. Let's go ahead and do just that right here. To show you that we can use numbers, I'm going to set it equal to 0, which is indeed off. I can save this, switch back over to app.js, and now we have nothing at all. I could have made it a warning. I could have enabled more extensions. The choice really is yours. Personally, I'm going to allow people to use JSX in any file type they like. So now that we have this in place, we've seen how we can customize the built-in rules as well as third-party rules that come from the various packages we've installed. And this should get you started in the right direction. With this in place, you can integrate ESLint into your existing code base. You can get super stressed out when you see all of the errors, and then you can go through the process of defining your styles. And once you actually set up your style and you have all of your rules configured, you're done. You can go ahead and use that for all of your projects, and you can keep consistent, clean, and easy to read code everywhere. So that is it for ESLint. Super great tool. I highly recommend you use it for all of your projects. It really is a no-brainer. It's going to save you time from debugging, and it's going to enforce rules that are important for good development. That is it for this free ESLint mini course. I'm Andrew Mead of Mead.io. I will see you in the next one.